You're listening to Potty Mouth Radio, the home of movies, music, television, and comedy. We watch a thing. We watch a thing.
Welcome to We Watched a Thing. Listeners will be aware that my normal co-host Billy is not alongside me today, but I am most honoured to be joined by a very special guest. Listeners will remember just on a year ago now when we did our wrap-up of 2023, and as is our custom, also looked back at those films that had held up from 10 years earlier, that my number one film of 2013 was a film called Coherence, which you've all heard me bang on about time and time again, and it is my enormous pleasure to be joined by the writer-director of Coherence, Mr. James Ward Byrkit. Jim, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Dave. Very happy to be here.
Now, you'll forgive me. My mind is a cornucopia of questions. I will be bouncing all over the place, so forgive me and roll with the punches. We will obviously get to your latest project, Shatter Belt, but before we do that, for those that aren't aware, even prior to Coherence, your name's popped up on a number of things that people would be aware of, working with the likes of Gore Verbinski. I mean, how did you sort of come to that? Because I know you started out doing storyboarding and stuff, I believe. How did you come to be involved with the likes of the Pirates franchise and Rango?
Yeah, well, when I was right out of school, I was storyboarding, and that was sort of my entrance into the film world. I wanted to be a filmmaker, and so Gore was one of the very first directors that I was working with when he was doing commercials. And he every week or two he'd have a new commercial, and he was one of many directors that I was sort of bouncing around with. Michael Bay and Ben Stiller, I can remember, were directing commercials back then, and Gore and I just really hit it off and did dozens and dozens and dozens of projects, short projects together. And so when he started making features, he just kind of took me along and would always ask me if I was, available for another adventure. So we did Mouse Hunt together, and The Ring, and The Mexican, and then Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy. And then that kind of led to Rango, because each time I'd work with him, I think I would sort of press it a little more, like not just doing storyboards. I would start sort of writing or suggesting dialogue or suggesting story. And so by the time Rango came around, he was like, why don't we just write the story? And it just kind of grew very organically.
No, it's fantastic. It's still one of my favorite animated films ever. I believe do you voice a character in it?
Yeah, I voice several minor characters in Rango, and we wrote some songs together. And I designed the character of Rango. I did the first sketch of Rango. So there was a lot of collaboration involved.
So that neck, that's you? You came up with that neck?
Yeah, exactly. And the big belly and kind of, yeah. I tell this story, like the first time I saw a poster for Rango, that, in Los Angeles, when a movie comes out, there's like posters everywhere. And I saw this billboard, and my face just went red, because for a split second, I thought it was me. I thought it was a picture of me. And I was just so like, And then I realized, oh, no, that's Rango. That's something I designed.
And so from there, I will ask you later about Fractalus, because I'm intrigued by that.
Okay.
But we get to Coherence. It's the kind of the big one to talk about. Now, made for the price of a cup of tea,
right? Shot
entirely in your living room.
Right.
And a little bit of street, but basically there. How did this? Did you have the idea first and go, well, I've got no money, so how do I make it work? Or how did it?
Sort of. I just knew I needed to make a film. I was just dying. Year after year, you pitch things and you're told no, and then you pitch other things and you're told no, and I was just like, this is ridiculous. Like, I know I'm capable of making something. So I'm just going to do it. And it's just going to have to be micro budget, because I don't have any funding. I don't have a studio. And so I was just absolutely determined to shoot something. And I just put the elements together. I was like, what do I have? I've got a living room and I've got some friends that can act. And these new cameras now exist that consumers can afford, that for the first time in history, you can emulate, a feature film. And so I just put those elements together, and Coherence was born.
And at what point did you decide it was a good idea to not script it properly, so you couldn't block it, you couldn't do anything, and make it presumably so much harder for yourself? The end result is fantastic, but
yeah, that was an experiment that I'd always wanted to try, because I had been directing commercials, and I've been doing short films, and I was helping other people, people on their big films. And most of filmmaking is you're sitting around waiting. You're waiting for stuff. You're waiting for, actors to come out of their trailer, and you're waiting for things. And so I always just thought, if I could just get rid of the script and get rid of the crew, I could really move. And getting rid of the script was an experiment, because I thought the problem with most movies where people are supposed to be talking in a group is that they don't sound, that's not how people talk.
No.
People don't wait for somebody to finish their line. And I was a big fan of Lost. So I love the show Lost.
Yeah.
But it drove me crazy when they would be in a big group and like only the leads would talk, and they would,
everyone's waiting for their turn.
Yeah. It was so weird to my ear that they would wait for the other person to say their line, and you just feel that it's written. You just feel that that's the hand of the writer, as opposed to the way people actually talk. And I thought, what you need to do is tell them, don't worry about the script, just talk, just say what you need to say, and the natural rhythms will find themselves.
Yep.
So that was an experiment I'd always just thought of doing, and so when I made my own film, I thought this is probably the only chance I'm going to ever have to test that theory. And so it really was a great joy to see it actually come together, because it should have been a train wreck, to be honest. But I got lucky with the right people, and my skill set just happened to fit in with that technique.
And how did when you assembled Maury and Nick and Hugo and Emily and etc., you got your cast of friends together, what was their response to when they said, "Oh, okay, so where's the script?"
They weren't worried. I mean, Maury was concerned because he does not do improv, and so he was very tense about it. But everybody else, nobody thought they were making a movie. They just thought they were indulging their friend Jim. Like, yeah, we'll come over to your house and try this experiment, whatever. Like, there was no pressure really, because it was never presented as, hey, we're going to make a movie that's going to travel the world, and this is going to be seen by millions of people.
Certainly what little I've seen of interviews with certainly Hugo and I think Elizabeth, I saw talk about it, were overwhelmingly positive about the experience and how freeing it was. So you obviously had the right folk. Yeah,
and a lot of it is a psychological aspect to letting go of certain things, but always being in control. And that's a very weird balance, because normally a director is 100% in control. And this is allowing for chaos and allowing for things to go differently than you planned, but being able to roll with it and being like, oh, okay, so if they're going to play that as a joke, then that means I need to somehow steer it back this way later, which is, you just never do that as a film, because you can't risk wasting time.
Yeah.
But on this, I could risk it because we were moving so fast and there was no money to waste anyway. So we might as well try. And it all becomes about psychology at that point. This, like, what does each actor need to feel safe and supported and feel like, something great is going to happen, even if they don't understand it.
And for you and Alex, I guess, and I'm assuming it was probably just the two of you a lot of the time, other than the cast. it must have been in equal parts exciting and I guess slightly nerve-wracking every time you sort of said action, because you must have been having to pivot on your feet really quickly to make sure, because you were operating the camera, I believe.
Right.
Make sure you're pointing at the right person when they say that golden bit of dialogue that you don't know is coming because it's not scripted.
Yeah.
This is ninja filmmaking.
Yeah, it felt like I was on a tightrope over a flaming pit at all times, and yet I was just like, "No, I can do this." This is like, I am especially built for this situation right now. So yeah, it's a weird feeling of like, this is ridiculous. This is so close to being a disaster, and yet I know it's going to work.
My co-host Billy, who's unfortunately unwell, so couldn't join us. He's a camera operator, editor by trade, and a visual effects artist. I forced him to watch Coherence, which he'd never heard of a year or so ago, which he loved. But I remember him saying that he got such severe anxiety watching things like the dining room scene where you've got everyone in there.
Yeah.
When I explained to him that it wasn't fully scripted out, cast were given sort of vague directions, or, stop this person leaving the room or something like that. But other than that, they just kind of made it up as they went along. His mind was going to, well, how did they light it? Because they didn't know if they were going to be shooting in this direction. So you can't have cabling everywhere. You can't have this. There's no budget to take stuff out digitally in post.
Yeah.
You literally gave him palpitations watching those scenes, just trying to imagine how on earth you did it.
Yeah, well, we had a great DP, Nick Sadler, who was operating the other camera, and he came in and I told him, Nick, we can't have any cables. We can't have any visible lights. You have to just light it with natural lighting. And he came up with a plan. And he said, all right, we're going to put 2 lamps on the table, which you never do because that blocks faces, right? So we were just breaking rules all over. And he's like, look, we need these 2 lamps here. You're gonna have to shoot around the lamps, but at least their faces will be lit. And so it was just, everything was breaking a rule and making the best of it. And then trusting your filmmaker instincts, and I could tell when it was working. I could see out of the corner of my eye what Nick was shooting. I could look in my own viewfinder and say, like, yeah, that's probably going to edit together. And then just feeling the flow of how the actors were going. And you just, I don't know, it's almost having a extra sense of saying, well, what's probably going to happen in the next 2 seconds, so that you can get the camera there or you can focus. And so it becomes a very strange, predictive exercise in really being in rhythm with your actors so that you can capture the part that you need to capture. But that's also why there's a lot of shaky cam in the film, which drives me crazy because I don't want to make a shaky cam movie. But that's a natural effect of not not rehearsing and not blocking, not telling the actors what they need to do.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, it does kind of fit that. And I use the term lovingly, the mumblecore kind of real aesthetic that it has, so that it does all work together, I guess.
Yeah, that's just a natural effect of how we did it. That was not, that's not my choice of how I want a film to look all the time.
Did you have to do a lot of kind of second takes where something that you didn't anticipate, maybe Nick said something that you didn't anticipate that sort of took things in a different direction and that made you think, oh, geez, I wish I'd been on the other side of the room shooting that. Guys, can we go again just like that?
They weren't really takes, though. They were like entire new journeys, because instead of doing takes like in a normal film, you're like, okay, let's do that line so that we have 8 versions of that line, right? Or we have that line from 5 different angles. In this, it was more like, all right, let's go back 20 minutes and let's do that whole thing again, but this time let's do it a completely different way. And this time let's go into the kitchen and see what happens. So they were entirely different journeys that would happen as opposed to different takes.
That's so fitting for the story of the film.
Right.
That you were
Yeah.
essentially kind of shooting different households' versions of the same thing almost.
Kind of. And I'd have to, especially the first day, I'd have to correct the actors sometimes in not overdoing it, because again, they didn't know what the story was. They
Yeah.
didn't know there was a story planned for them. And so a lot of them would work themselves up into a story or into a state of emotion. And almost everybody started to cry at one point. And I had to step in and say, look, you don't need to cry. Like you don't need to generate anything besides what's already happening. And they needed to adjust to that, because they felt at first the pressure was on them to generate a story.
Yeah.
And only by the second or third day did they realize, oh no, there's a whole story planned for them.
Trust
that
in
all
Jim,
they
we
have
trust.
to do is experience. You know?
Did you kind of work things in along the way that weren't maybe their original? Like obviously having Nick Brendan on the cast, you've got the option of having, without digital effects, two of him in the room, being a twin.
Right.
Did you kind of work that in because that the opportunity was there?
Yeah, from the very beginning, when I was sort of putting it together, I was like, okay, what do I have? I've got a living room. I've got a friend. I've got a friend with a twin. Okay, like within 30 seconds, that element was part of the grand plan. Yeah,
because I know people who weren't aware that Nicholas Brendan had a twin, and after watching the film, like, how did he do that?
Yeah. I think I would have done even more of it, looking back, because we had his brother for just an hour, I think, so we just had to make the most of it.
Yeah, no, it certainly added to it. Look, I could talk about Coherence for the next 5 hours, but firstly, I do want to get to Shatter Belt, and also listeners have heard me talk about it ad infinitum. I'll reiterate,
No
if you
problem.
haven't seen it.
I love talking about it because it was such a positive experience. So it's very easy to.
Well, I mean, obviously, you get to the end of producing something like this, you must have been enormously proud of the finished product, given all the limitations and the kind of weird journey to create this film. Once you kind of send that baby out into the world and try it at festivals and things, were you surprised by the response it got? I mean, you obviously proud of it. It's a fantastic piece of work, but you never know, particularly when something's this off kilter and weird. Maybe it falls on its ass. Maybe a few people really love it, but most people go, nah, don't get it. But it's on so many people's best sci-fi films of all time. That must have kind of blown your expectations out of the water.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I always imagined the goal was to get on the list of like the best mind benders. Like that was sort of in the background. Alex and I would joke about that. Like, what are we trying to do, in terms of not just completing a film and not just having the themes, explored, but in terms of accomplishment. And it was just really getting on with great mind benders. And then it started getting strange a few years ago where like, it's not just one of the best mind benders, but like best sci-fi, best indie sci-fi and whatever, then best sci-fi of all time. So that's a little strange. I think people are being a little generous, but I'll take it.
I guess, I mean, it depends on, and that's one of the reasons why when Billy and I do our end of the year kind of wrap up what's our top 5 films of the year, we always look back 10 years as well, because, and this is, I had no input into the creation of this idea. This was Billy and a former co-host who came up with it. But the idea that you can't, recency bias is a real thing. You can't really assess how good something is until it's sat with you for a while, and what things is, and the top 5 favorites 10 years later are never the top 5 that you have at the time. And certainly one of the Coherence for me, and I've watched it, I don't know, 10, 12 times. Couldn't tell you. But it's something that keeps giving. Whereas something with a lot of flash and budget and special effects, a lot of the impact is at the first viewing, and that will taper because the wow factor's not there. Whereas I think that's where the value in things like Coherence, Shane Carruth's primer, which, I mean, don't tell him, but I don't think it's a patch on Coherence. But there's a fantastic film called Time Crimes, which is a little low budget.
Nacho.
These films reward repeat viewings, and I think that's where you get the longevity in things, and that's why I think maybe now it's cropping up in some of the best indie sci-fi rather than just best mindbender, because it's sat with people and they've gone back to it multiple times and gone, oh my god, I didn't realize, they're from that house, oh my god, that's
that was very much the intention from the beginning. We said we want to make a film that's built for multiple watching. So it's very gratifying to hear that came across.
Oh, 100%. And there are so many people online who've created intricate mind maps of where the houses and who goes where and who's from where. Fabulous stuff. Anyone out there who hasn't seen Coherence, I'll find, I don't know where it's streaming right now. I'll find all that and I'll put it in the links so that you can go and make sure that you've seen it or see it again.
Please do.
But during COVID, you had an idea for another project. Do you want to tell us sort of the genesis of this thing, which feels like, I mean, it's been years to get to most people's screens.
Yeah. After Coherence, I just could not get another project off the ground. Everything that looked like it was going to happen would fall apart at some point. And at some point I was even going to do a television series version based on Primer. And then that blew up because of political fallout from certain situations. And everything was just crashing, especially during COVID. I had all these great projects lined up and they all died. And I just kind of had a realization that I was never going to direct again unless I just picked up a camera again and did what I did with Coherence, called up some friends and just started making it. And it was really just sort of saying, all right, what do I truly love? I love the Twilight Zone. I love working with my friends. I love these big questions about reality, these big questions about consciousness and what are we doing on this planet? How do we relate to each other? How do we even know what reality is? And I was just inspired by what Rod Serling did on Twilight Zone, how he just cranked out scripts each week that were very low budget. Those were really tiny. That's why so many of them are like one guy in a city, in a town alone. And I just had to start being a filmmaker again. And Shatter Belt represented all of that passion, frustration, and love of collaboration all rolled into the first 4 episodes, which people can track down in various ways. And really those are just the first homemade, if you imagine those are like, as if Star Trek was made just by Gene Roddenberry in his backyard so that he could convince NBC to actually make the show. That's what Shatter Belt is. It's like our first homemade versions that you can then imagine, okay, what if they actually got a little bit of support and where would these ideas go from there?
And this time around, crowdfunding, Kickstarter.
A little bit of crowdfunding. We had some people who were fans of Coherence that gave larger amounts to sort of support it because it's much more ambitious than Coherence. It takes place on multiple locations. It's got giant cast and some name actors, and we actually fed people this time, and we had all the COVID costs. The COVID costs for Shatter Belt cost more than the entire movie of Coherence. So we had to have a little bit of a real budget for that.
Yeah, I was kicking. I missed the Kickstarter, or I would 100% have been on that. I love supporting crowdfunded films. So sadly that had closed by the time I heard about it. But it's one of the things I love about crowdfunding is the opportunity for non-creatives or people who love an idea of something to be involved, even if it's just in a little way. It's a really one of the nice things about the digital age.
Yeah, we're really grateful for everybody who contributed and made it all happen. It was all done with just friends and supporters, and we wanted to avoid Hollywood and wanted to avoid sort of watering it down and changing it to match whatever algorithm Netflix has in the week.
Yep.
And so it comes across as a very different product, a very different creation than the things that are on TV right now.
The thing that surprised me, which I love, is that they're short, snappy episodes. They're not, just under half an hour from memory on them. No flab at all. It's just they're like little mini short films.
Yeah, we wanted to do the opposite of what seems to be the style today, especially with Apple or whoever, which takes an 80-minute idea and stretches it to 9 or 10 episodes and just says, let's just fill it up. Let's just expand it. We thought, what if we do the opposite? What if we take an 80-minute idea and compress it to 27 minutes?
That's great for late night binging because I love. There's a lot of shows I love. I love the Beck Ferguson show, Silo, things like that. Stranger Things, another example. And some of the time, I love the idea of an episode that's like an hour and 20 minutes long because you're really getting your money's worth. But when it's late at night and kind of something ends and you go, oh, God, I just want a little bit more. I don't want another 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And the stories that you've created in Shatter Belt, there's a lot in those 27 or whatever minutes. There's packed. a lot of ideas in that little tiny space of time.
Yeah, that was the goal. Again, kind of an experiment to see if we could cram in big, heady ideas into little packets of entertainment, and each one with a different cast. And they're kind of thematically related, and you'll see some of the same faces appear. And it's almost like a dream-like logic that's tying them together. And especially if we were to do more episodes, you'd see recurring themes and recurring faces and go back to some of the same stories. So you'd see things woven in more and connecting even more.
So what is your kind of water cooler pitch on what Shatter Belt's about? It's big, heady, the relationships between humanity and material things and the digital. How would you kind of describe the kind of interconnected thematic?
Yeah, I mean, it's simply the cracks of reality that we all can sense around us. Everybody, I think, has at some point in time this little gnawing voice in the back of their head saying, what if reality is a lot weirder than we are all admitting? And what are those cracks and what are those connective moments that kind of get us from a physical world, but we are non-physical brains and thoughts? How is that even possible? And Shatter Belt really describes that line between the two things, the physical and the non-physical.
Because all four of these episodes it's not quite our world. There's a bit of kind of magical realism going on. There are things happening that wouldn't happen in the real world.
Yeah.
Some of them feel like they're maybe slightly in the future. The first couple of episodes, certainly. And the third, definitely. But I want to really avoid any sort of spoilers on what they're about. But the one thing I would say to people is please feel free to disagree, but the one thing I would say is when you go and watch these four, I would watch Pearl's last.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Because I think I love all four of them, but it really goes places. And I think you want to kind of end on that one.
Yeah.
Rather than maybe on Patton's episode, which is more of an emotional journey and almost brings you to tears, I think.
Oh,
that one.
I suggest that people start with episode 2, to be honest, because it kind of throws you in to the concept a little quicker, and then maybe go 2 2, 3, 4, 1 or 2, 3, 1, 4. I don't know, but I would start on episode 2. Just it's a little more of a punch. Episode 1 was written when I really thought it was just going to be me and an iPhone in my living room again. So it's a lot smaller. It's a lot more talky than the others. But they expand very quickly after episode 1.
Yeah. 1 certainly had a bit of a Coherence feel because you've got Hugo and Emily obviously there as well.
That's true. Yeah.
Emotus, episode 2 is the one that I'm looking forward to showing this to my kids because they're big ideas but short episodes. So I think the attention span will work for them, and they like weird stuff. They like horror and they like sci-fi. But I'm dubious about episode 2 because I really don't need to give them excuses not to eat fruit.
Not to what?
Not to eat fruit. I don't need to be saying, eat your fruit. I'd love to, but I can't.
Yeah. Immovable.
So you must be enormously pleased that they're out there now. I know I, probably along with thousands of other people, have been pinging you on X and whatever going, when's it coming to this country? When's it coming to this country? Now on Apple Plus, and again, I'll put links down there for people in Australia and elsewhere to be able to go and watch these. What's next? Obviously, the end goal isn't 4 short episodes, as you've said. Have you got more ideas or more scripts, already done, ready to go?
Yeah, the rest of season 1 is all written. We've got another 7 episodes for season 1, but they're all a little more expensive, and so we really can't. I can't pay for them out of my pocket. So we really need, to be able to prove that we've got a fan base, and that might take a year. It might take 10 years. I don't know. Coherence took 8 years to kind of get in the zeitgeist as one of the best sci-fi films of all time. I would love it if this went a little faster than that, but we're kind of at the mercy of the fans finding it and then submitting that as evidence to a streamer or a platform to say, look, people like this and you should fund it.
Yep. And they're short episodes, so they're cheaper than making hour-long episodes.
Yeah. But I was so excited. I mean, if someone told me that this is all I could do for the next 20 years is make these TV episodes, but I could never do another film, I'd say, okay, I'll take that deal.
Yeah.
Because every day I wake up with another idea for a story, and these, you can just write them and shoot them and write them and shoot them. And they're so satisfying to work with a new group of people in a new location, get a new tone, and then have it complete in a month rather than a year.
Yeah. I mean, 20 years of Shatter Belt, I would be very happy. I do still want to know what happens to Megan and Murphy, though. I need a Channels Part 2 or something.
Oh. Yeah, that's basically a test for a Shatter Belt episode, but that was a whole series that was going to star Abigail Spencer, and it's hard now because so many of those ideas are now in Dark Matter. I don't know if you've seen Dark Matter, but they literally have scenes that are almost word for word out of Channels, which came out 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So I can't really even pitch that because they'll be like, this is Dark Matter? Like, it is 8 years before Dark Matter.
Yeah, and Dark Matter was just riffing on Fringe, really, in a lot of ways. But the Channels, and for anyone who's mildly interested in the sort of parallel world type sci-fi, go to jimbyrkit.com and you can watch the show that never was, Channels.
Yeah, there's basically a free pilot episode of Channels, which is like 25 minutes long. And just beautiful performances by Abigail and Jason O'Mara. And it was shot by Alice Brooks, who just shot Wicked.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, just again, like top quality. That was one of the heartbreakers I told you about. Like, that was one of the things I poured effort into. Everybody who saw it was like, oh, this is great. You're going to definitely sell this. We got an offer from a company, Quibi, and then they went out of business. They crumbled, I think, 4 months later and just didn't even exist anymore.
Such the little closing teaser, quick cuts of this is all the stuff that's to come in the future episodes that you're never going to see.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for watching that. That was heartbreaking.
But we do have Shatter Belt now, and fingers crossed it will be embraced as wholeheartedly as Coherence was, but in a much shorter space of time.
Nice.
Implore everyone out there, go check it out. As I said, check below. There'll be links. If you're listening to the audio podcast, there'll be show notes with the links in there, so you can find it. Anyone who's in a part of the world and can't find it, send me an email and I'll message Jim and we'll find out where you can get your hands on it.
Let everybody know, because the thing is, if we have fans, it allows me to make another episode or another Coherence or something. It all comes from the fans right now.
Yep. I cannot recommend it and Coherence highly enough. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. This has been an absolute dream for me. I'm a huge fan of yours, as you know, and I wish you nothing but the best with Shatter Belt.
And I wish you the same for your podcast, and I hope your co-host gets better soon.
He's definitely on the mend. I know he'll be gutted not to have been here for this, but he can watch the video like everyone else.
Awesome. Well, there might be a sequel to Coherence coming out.
I kind of figured it was hush hush, so I was going to wait until I stopped recording and ask you about that. But I did see a brief mention of that on a tweet or something. So yeah, 100%. As soon as there's stuff to say, I will come begging and drag you back kicking and screaming.
That sounds great. Dave, thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Jim. All the best, mate, and all the best to everyone over in LA with the fires and everything.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
So, kitchen this way?
Yeah.
And it's just you here today?
Me and my husband, Carl. He's just fixing something up.